Good morning and a very warm welcome from myself, Warren Van Wyk. I'm one of the co-founders of PaySpace, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about the wonderful world of APIs and how you guys can use them to accomplish all sorts of business requirements within your organization. Hopefully, some of what I share today will be some value to you, your respective roles and companies. We only have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to dive straight into things. The agenda for today, just very quickly, is just the showcasing and just talking through some of the typical web services that the majority of clients usually look for in a solution like PaySpace. I'm going to flip through our API documentation and just point out some nuggets of information that are important. I'm going to physically set up some API credentials for you guys within PaySpace and just talk about the security aspect of that particular setup, because that's often where customers come and get unstuck regarding certain business requirements. I'm going to be using Postman to just do one or two queries just to show you how the whole thing kind of fits together. Then I'm going to showcase some of the webhook functionality, which is also a very powerful portion or part of APIs. And then lastly, I'm going to end off with sharing some cool project ideas with you. Okay, so let's look at some of the typical web services that PaySpace offers and that clients use out there in the market space. So on the left-hand side, if you look at the sort of functions that flow into PaySpace, and this is typically where customers may have an upstream HR or ERP solution. So for example, you're running a solution where it's your source of capture and you wanting to capture all of the employee information in an upstream solution. And then you want to flow these down into PaySpace via the API layer. So typically, what we would look at there is the employer biographical details, addresses, first names, last names, agendas, etc. Then we've got our tax details, which typically then contains the start dates, the termination dates, the tax statuses, your ID numbers that flow into PaySpace. We can accommodate package details, such as your gross salary information, how many hours on average you work per day, per month. Job details, which reflects all of your org unit allocations, your reporting to people, etc. And then quite importantly and used quite a bit within our environment is the once-off payroll input, which is generally input that flows in from time and attendance systems or any third-party applications. So that kind of just shows you what type of information you can push into PaySpace. There's a lot more that you could do, and I'll flick through that in the documentation very shortly. And then when you look at extracting information out of PaySpace, what you'd want to then look at to populate all sorts of other business applications like downstream ERP solutions. So often customers use PaySpace as the source of capture, and they want to flow down the employee information into a downstream solution of some sort. Then you can certainly do that, and that is where our webhooks become very important. Time and attendance solutions is a very popular application that are used within sort of your wage type environments, where you want to extract all employee changes such as new employees, terminated employees, any changes of cost centers, for example, and you want to populate your time and attendance solutions so when the guys clock in at the physical machines, that it knows exactly who you are and it can log the time against your profile. We've got clients that actually populate Active Directory from a PaySpace onboarding flow, for example, or a termination flow. Maybe you want to close off their network account or their AD account. And then you've got clients that also populate intranet environments for all sorts of purposes within the business environment. So that just shows you that you can extract all sorts of employee changes through our API layer, which I'll showcase as well using Postman. Another popular method is the leave transactions. Leave transactions are very popular for the time and attendance crowd as well. So when a guy applies for leave within PaySpace, it gets approved by a manager. The time and attendance solution wants to know about that so that they can then mark the guy as absent or on leave. So when those hours flow back into PaySpace, he's paid out appropriately. Another key aspect is the payslip in PDF format. So this is also when you've got kind of an upstream HR or ERP solution where you want to show the actual physical PDF payslip to an employee in the self-service module of an upstream HR solution. So this is something, for example, that we've done with Workday, where an employee self-service within Workday can actually click on a function within Workday and it will actually retrieve the payslip in real time from PaySpace through the API layer and show the person the payslip like they've never even left the Workday environment. So that's also another popular function over there. And then you've got access to obviously also withdraw or draw down your payslip details and leave balances. So this is maybe where you want to populate, third-party data warehouses of some sort, maybe do some reporting in Power BI off our API layer. Your payslip details contains all of the earnings, deductions, company contributions, note components, and leave balances that you can use to do all sorts or create all sorts of, incredible reports for within the business environment. From an audit and a governance perspective, another popular one is your EFT files. So as you know, PaySpace will facilitate the majority of all the bank, EFT files within the South Africa and Africa region. We have the ability to also customize those files for you guys if you work within the African countries. But what you want to have happen there is when a particular payroll administrator releases an EFT file, that you actually have a middleware layer that picks up that EFT file and populates it into a banking solution of some sort if your bank accommodates that. So what that gets rid of is any sort of audit risk where the auditors are not happy that the file can be manipulated once downloaded from PaySpace. So that is also just another option to be aware of. And then along similar lines, the general ledger extract is also something that you can also automate from start to finish. So when a period closes, you want to extract all of the costing information related to various employees and populate your upstream or downstream financial system. And you can also automate that process that you can retrieve the general ledger extract in its raw native format, or you can use our GL scripting tool and actually create a bespoke layout, whether it be ASCII, comma delimited, pipe delimited, whatever the case is. There's a myriad of options over there. You can also go and extract out your GL interface or your general ledger interface in whatever format suits your financial system. Okay, so let's flick to the API documentation very quickly, because this is kind of the hub of where everything takes place within PaySpace. Let me just find it here. There it is. And I just want to work through some of the key points on our API documentation. So first of all, to note over here is you can extract the entire collection of endpoints into your Postman application by just simply clicking on this button over here, and it'll import it into Postman and look like this, for example. So you'll have all of your endpoints over here. You don't have to go and create these things manually. You'll see the folder structures are exactly the same as the online documentation. And I also just want to point out that the folder structures are also mimicking or mirroring our application menu items. So if you are familiar with our menu items within PaySpace, the APIs have been structured in the exact same layout as the menu options, so you don't get confused as to how you find a certain piece of functionality or an API endpoint. You can kind of just understand that it's exactly mirrored to what you'd find within the application stack. Okay, people often ask us, how do we go about testing the APIs? We do offer a testing environment in our sandbox environment where you can go and set this up and just take note of the authentication URL and the API URLs. And when you're happy with your testing, you can then flick across to your production environment and just note that those are different URLs as well. So just note that you can go and create your full test cases within our testing environment, make sure that everyone's happy, and pivot it across and release it to production. One of the other items that often come up is the paging of data. So whenever you do a retrieval of information from PaySpace, which is in the REST world is called a GET, we will limit the amount of records to 100 by default. And you need to use a paging type exercise or format or construct, let's call it, where you actually page through the various records. So you can include a parameter that tells or that returns, for example, the number of records that we have available for you. So for example, if you've got 500 employee records available, you're going to get the top 100 as by default. And then using the top and the skip parameters, you can go and get, for example, the next chunk of 100 onwards as well. So this is often something that comes up from questions from clients saying that I'm only getting 100 employees. Why is that? It's because we are purposefully restricting to have a paging construct that we only return 100 records at a time. And that is to kind of just make sure from a resource perspective that we can serve all of our customers timelessly, and we're not delivering, for example, huge data loads and gigs of data across the network that is going to sort of impact our resources as well as your resources. The other thing along similar lines is rate limits. So for example, the number of requests that you can do per minute is limited to 2,000. Okay, very similar to your paging. It's just to make sure that we're not getting bombarded by customers that are just doing an extraordinary amount of requests. You need to kind of build in logic within your application stack to make sure that you're actually only accessing around 2,000 requests per minute. And just note that for staging just goes down as well over here to 200. Okay. Be aware that we've got response errors that come back for every single query that you do. So for example, not found, unauthorized from a permissions perspective. I'll touch on that very briefly as well. If it's a bad request, maybe your JSON is not well formatted. These are the types of errors that you can kind of expect over here. Okay. And then we kind of dive straight into, the authentication. So this is something that you would do to retrieve what we call an authentication token or a bearer token in the tech world. And I wanted to step through actually how you go about creating client ID, a client ID, or let's call it API credentials within PaySpace, and then switch back to Postman and actually show you in real time how we actually authenticate, how we retrieve the bearer token, and how we use that bearer token to actually query employee information within PaySpace. Okay, so just note over here the authentication step. And from a documentation perspective, what's important over here is that you read over here what type of parameters and options you need to have on within Postman, for example, to be able to successfully retrieve a bearer token. So you're going to pass through a client ID, a client secret, which is something we'll generate within PaySpace shortly, and then you're going to have to specify the scope parameter. So depending on what your business requirement is, you may only want to extract information out of PaySpace to populate, for example, a data warehouse. You don't need to update, so therefore you can kind of restrict all the API access to be read-only. Or if it's a bi-directional sort of integration concept, you may want to extract information out of PaySpace and push information into PaySpace, depending on what you want to do. So these are the two most popularly used scopes within the PaySpace application. Okay. Then similar to what I've just said, we've got our employee menu. These are all the employee endpoints that we've got available to you. On the slide in the beginning, I touched on some of the key ones, but also note, for example, you can update or request banking details on an employee, dependents, attachments. If you kind of got any solutions that are storing documentation around employees, you can design an integration to actually push those documents back down into PaySpace. You can maintain project details, asset registers, and then our employee custom forms for our master clients is also something where customers have gone and designed their own custom forms for whatever reason, and you can push information into those forms as well as extract information from those forms. Then if we look at the kind of payroll processing tab down the bottom over here, this is your pay rate detail, which is kind of your gross salary. Any recurring components, and this is where it gets quite intensive in terms of all the different flavors of earnings and deductions and company contributions that you can have on an employee. But just know that you can query all of these to, for example, we've got customers that are drawing down third-party payment files or third-party reports. They've designed some awesome integrations with that type of data as well. Take on year-to-date figures you can push into PaySpace. Recurring templates is something that you can add to an employee. So for example, if you've got a union-based employees that work in different regions within the country and have different earnings and deductions that you want to deduct off them, you can attach an employee to a recurring fixed profile and it will automatically inherit all of the flavors of deductions and earnings for that classification of employee as well. So that's also just important to note over there. Then when we get to the payroll results, this is where all the magic also happens. You can go and query a collection of payslips, for example, and it will go and give you for a particular period, like year and month, all of the payslips in your raw data format. So for example, on the right-hand side here, you can go and have a look at example payload of what will return if you were to query this particular endpoint. So as you can see over here, I've got my start and end dates, the physical pay dates of the payslip, the net pay value, the employee number, and then you've got a collection of all the payslip lines for earnings, deductions, company contributions, and lastly, I've got all my leave balances. So you can work through all of this information and pick out exactly what you need to populate the third-party system that you're looking to do. Here is the collection of payslips in PDF format. So this then stems or actually retrieves the PDF payslip for our default payslip that is applicable for all of our customers. And if you more recently you've noticed we've actually released the ability to have customized payslips. This endpoint will actually retrieve those customized payslips in the PDF format that you guys have designed them for, with all of your company logos on it, layouts, whatever the case is over there. Edit payslip, very popular as well. This is something where you can go and use to actually, for example, update, time and attendance type input. So when you've got hours flowing back downstream from time and attendance solutions, we've got many partners that have created fantastic solutions to automate that entire process. So for example, you've got a particular function within the time and attendance app where they'll click on a button, the user will click on the button, and it will push down all of the time automatically into PaySpace without any manual intervention. So this whole kind of concept of extracting a flat file, navigating to PaySpace and uploading it manually is kind of done away with. There are many vendors out there that have just automated that entire process from start to finish. And then you can also go throughout the period, for example, after week 1, batch upload the first week, and after week 2, update the payslip to include hours from the second week. So you can kind of add to the hours that you've added during the month at any point in time. You can also go and retrieve tax certificates over here. So if you want to populate any sort of solution, upstream HR solution or downstream ERP solution with tax certificates, that is also available to you. From a leave perspective, you can apply or add, for example, extract leave applications, apply adjustments, apply application from an upstream solution. So that's all there for you. And, there's many other options as well. From a company perspective, just very quickly, here's your general ledger extract, your EFT outbox facility where you can extract your EFT outbox. Okay. Then you get the webhooks, which is pretty important as well. So webhooks is a principle where you want to let a third-party system know of a change within PaySpace. So rather than actually poll PaySpace on a periodic basis and extract all the information and process through every single employee record and try and figure out who has changed and what has changed, PaySpace has the ability to let you know when something has changed based on a user event. So if I go in, for example, and I capture a new engagement, or I terminate someone, or I do a promotion, any sort of change within an employee profile, we can let a third-party system know about that change by passing through the record that changed, and then you guys can only process that particular one record rather than iterate through thousands of records to try and figure out what's changed. And obviously that's a very resource-intensive process as well. So you'll notice, for example, we share a link here that is a free online tool set that generates a unique URL to test with, and I'm going to just showcase this very shortly as well. So that's it in a nutshell from a documentation perspective. What I'd like to now do is just flip across to PaySpace, our test environment, and actually create API credentials from scratch, just to show you how easy it is. I know we sort of pressed for time, so I'm just going to fly through this very quickly. So to get to our API credentials page, you'd go over here, and to set up API credentials, very straightforward. New credentials. I would call this, like, for example, Masterclass demo, just to kind of give you an English name that you can refer back to as to what these API credentials do. So maybe it's time and attendance solution name, HR solution name, whatever it is. The client ID is auto-generated, and this is important. This is sometimes where customers get a bit confused. If you want to design an integration that must have limited access to resources within the product. So for example, you're passing this on to a dev company that you want them to design you some sort of integration just for HR related information. You can actually tie down the API credentials to not have access to any payroll information or sensitive information you don't want them to have access to. And this is where the user permissions comes in. And you'll see over here, for example, we've got a list of all the users that have been set up in PaySpace that you can align to a particular API credential integration tool set, right? So for example, if I wanted to give a user only access to the biographical information, I would go and set up a user profile with a security role that is locked down to only access the employee basic profile screen. And by attaching this particular API credential to a user, if someone tried to query, for example, a payslip endpoint, it'll actually give them a forbidden access a message back. So for purposes of this, I'm just going to go and say I just want to read only, create a read only credentials. Development mode very quickly. In our test environment, if you were to flick this on and people were trying to query sensitive information like package information or payslip information, it'll actually mask the actual figures of the employees. So this is when you're passing it on to an internal dev department. You don't want them to have access to people's salaries, but they can still design an integration solution for you guys internally. You can flick on development mode and it will actually mask all of the figures should they query payslips. So they need to do it because the integration requires them to do it, but you don't want them to have access to the actual figures that are displaying on each person's payslip. All right, so I'm going to go and create these credentials. You'll see it generates obviously the client and the secret for me. Now, these are things that you need to basically take note of and store. So I'm going to go and copy the client ID. I'm going to flick very quickly to Postman. Where is it? There it is. And I'm going to pop into my get token over here, my client secret. And I'm going to go and copy, sorry, my client ID. And then I'm going to copy my client secret. And by doing this now, I've created a request, a GET request, where I can go and authenticate against my staging environment. And this is kind of the construct of the payload that's returned. I've got an access token, and I've got a collection of companies. If you're a multinational company that has got many entities underneath your umbrella, I'll get back a collection of companies that I can now go and use to construct, for example, other GET operations. So for example, if I wanted to use my test company over here and I wanted to go and get an employee record, you'll see there's my company ID that I'll go and pop in there. And I would, for example, go and say, I want to go and get an employee record for an employee number that equals HRD 007. And if I were to go and retrieve that, I go and send a request, there it's giving my status back, and here it's giving me my employee information back over here. If I wanted to go and get all employees, I'll remove this, what we refer to as an OData query, and I'll just go and query the employee endpoint, and you'll see now it'll give me a whole bunch of employees over here for the entire company. So that just shows you very quickly how to use Postman to actually construct a GET token and an employee record. Another tip I just want to share with you is that often I see customers are actually coming in here and copying out the authentication token to put into a GET operation. I'm just going to ask my team just to quickly share the script with you in the chat within this session over here. You can go and pop in this particular piece of JavaScript over here, which will automatically retrieve the access token and populate a variable called access token so that you can automatically just go to your other operations. So every time you authenticate, it'll automatically copy and paste this out like you would be doing manually. And that just saves you a lot of time as well. Okay. If I wanted to go and patch, for example, an employee record, this is just like the construct of a patch operation. Now, bearing in mind, I created a read-only permissioned API credential. So if I were to go and try and set the preferred name of Mike to that, I'd get a forbidden access. And there's like a good example of how our security actually kicks in based on the security role and the user role profile. Okay, and similarly, I can go and get open runs. Here's statuses, for example, go get me an open run for the monthly frequency where it's open and it is a main run. And there you go, you can kind of see the current open period for this particular company is October. And these are the run details over here that you would use maybe to retrieve a payslip line item, for example. Right, and here I've gone and retrieved the payslip line item for a company savings deduction, and you can obviously see over here, this is the savings deduction value for an employee number of that employee number. Okay, so I've showcased Postman and how to set up credentials very quickly. Just the webhooks, we've also an awesome feature. If I wanted to go and create a new webhook, and again, just call it Masterclass. I'm going to go to attach it to my basic profile, and I'm going to go and copy out the unique URL that's been generated for me by this testing tool set. I'm going to go pop it in here. I'm going to go disable chunk transfer encoding, which is just something that if you're building out solutions in Power Automate, this is something that Power Automate wants us to have on in order for them to like what we're doing. I'll go and create a webhook, and now you'll go and see, as you can see over here, it's waiting for my first request, right? So if I had to go navigate to any employee, for example, in the testing company, that's a bad example, not him. Let's go try Michael, here we are, he's my test employee, and I have to go to the basic profile and change anything within the basic profile and just say, I want to call this guy Mike, for example. Okay, and I go back to my webhook, there it is. So we fired off a webhook to the address over here, and we've told this particular middleware layer that it has been an edit on employee number HRD 007, and these are all the details that you can now use to actually do whatever it is that you need to do in your system downstream. Okay, so that's a very quick example of how to set up a webhook on a employee basic profile object, for example. All right, lastly and not least, but I'd like to just kind of showcase some other cool ideas that we have available to you and that you can build within your environment. So the ability to construct and send increase and bonus letters is a good idea. We're going to be doing this internally now ourselves, where you can use Power Automate to create some sort of a mail merging process, which takes all the employees within the system or within an Excel spreadsheet with the increased percentages or amounts, and actually mail merges letters automatically, emails them out, and uses the API layer to push back those letters the PDF documents back into the employee's profile onto the attachment screens, for example, so that they've always got access to that for themselves, right? And for historical purposes as well. You can create awesome benefit statements as well by looking at the payslip details and extracting out all of your benefits components, medical aids, pensions, providence. You can create awesome flows, for example, regarding staff movements. So if there's a particular change in an employee's profile for maybe he changed a grade or there was a promotion, you can build out trigger notifications to let people know about these events in particular departments or regions, whatever suits your environment. And lastly, you would have noticed if you attended our Power conference that I showcased our new onboarding module as well. And it is primarily built off webhooks and our API layer, where you can build out awesome features and notifications around employees onboarding, letting particular departments know, IT to provision, network access, security to provision, physical access, and the same applies for offboarding. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell for today. I really hope you've enjoyed and learnt a lot of what I've had to show to you today. And there'll be many other series in our masterclasses, so please be sure to actually join those and learn about all these golden nuggets that we have to share with you. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.